The following podcast is being brought to you by the Defy Life Podcast Network.
Welcome to Aftergate, powered by the Defy Life Network. Aftergate is a podcast series highlighting Colgate alumni of color in their professional endeavors after Gate. Aftergate is hosted by Alvin Glimp, aka Al, and Herman Dubois, aka Jerry. We are doing Aftergate because Colgate University has produced innovators who have changed the world every day. Yet many alumni of color in the mainstream Colgate community are unaware of the amazing accomplishments of Colgate alumni of color.
If you're into all things comics, you have to check out Take a Knee for Marvel vs. DC, your go-to podcast for comic and superhero discussion, debates, polls, and more. Tune in as regular Scott and Ozzy Killmonger chat about your favorite comic topics, and you never know who may show up for an open mic, or what will be next on their favorite One Gotta Go. Take a Knee for Marvel vs. DC, every Sunday, powered by the Defy Life Podcast Network.
Welcome to another episode of Aftergate. I'm Alvin, aka Al. It is an honor to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I just got real hyped, real fast, real quick, so I have all of the right energy for this show. So it is like really good to be here, and of course, I'm with my ride or die, my hermano, Jerry. How you doing, my brother?
What's good, brother? Great to be here. Excited about the illustrious guest we have on the show tonight,
Okay.
and ecstatic about coming off a week where we had a chance to rap with and meet the newest cohort of future AOC members. And
Can you
I
give
think
me a
it's
quick recap on what that was so that people know?
wow,
Real quick?
took it
What was
right
that?
there off the jump. Well, quick. So received an email from Sister Veronica McFall.
Yes.
We know her as Ronnie, who was an upperclassman. We were students there who now, and I don't know her official title, but serves in an administrative role at the university, and put together an event where she invited alumni of color across various decades to have sort of this opportunity to an informal career kind of panel virtually based on Zoom, where we spoke to this incoming class that literally I think they have a week left of their summer program before they start. So they're fresh. And it was a interesting platform because basically there was just a freestyle of asking us to share words of wisdom. There was no script, there was no Q&A. It was just, and so I don't really know how the other groups did. I know that Sister Kendra and I were in the same group, along with Jeff Williams, who was on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we had brother Keith Brooks and his wife. I forgot her first name, Sister Brooks, which was a tandem on the in our group. And I like to think our group rocked. I'm curious. I'd really be curious to see the video of what the other groups talked about, because I thought our group was right on point. And I'm not a betting man, but if we had to bet, I would say we caught the prize.
Well, we like to show up and then show out because that's
Of
just how
course.
we do it.
Of course.
OUS has a real special memory, that summer program that is actually where we met, where we became friends and been on this journey of companionship, homeboys ever since. So appreciate that. That's even better program than we were receiving because we were just figuring it out and wilding out ourselves. So shout out to Ronnie. I appreciate what she is putting together up there and has been really consistent and even getting better.
And props to the fact that, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but every AOC person that was participating was not necessarily an alum of OUS. So, for example, Jeff said in one of his opening comments, he was not an OUS member, and talked about the distinction of his experience coming onto campus as a freshman, even though he played football. Not being an OUS participant and wishing he had been. And so it was interesting dynamic that I'm sure there were other AOC members on the call who were not who didn't have that OUS experience. So which I thought was a strategic move to just show that AOC is beyond OUS.
It definitely had an impact on more than the students that come through that summer program.
Hmm.
Because for many, while we were there, their center was a haven, a safe place for students
Yep.
of color, and it was beyond whether or not you were a member of that program or whether
Yeah,
or not you
yeah,
could access that service and support.
yeah,
So
yeah.
shout out to OUS. Has consistently been a big part of our development, and in my opinion, for many of us, had a lot to do with why we were able to succeed and graduate. And I can talk about that
Mm-hmm.
on another note.
Yeah, yeah.
So now I want to switch gears and slide in our Colgate question of the week, right? So here's a Colgate question of the week. I'm curious to know, how did you select your major, and do you have any regrets?
So just because I know that there will be undergrads listening to this who might be faced with the same question right now in their life, the disclaimer is this is exactly how not to pick your major. Okay, so let's just get that out the way right now. Um, so I went into Colgate thinking I was going to do pre med. I wanted to go into sports medicine, and so I first semester at that time, you put classes, you selected classes that you thought you wanted, and then you get you got classes that were given to you, and they were just kicked out. And I remember getting my first semester freshman year 4 science classes.
Mm.
That was clearly a glitch in the system because that should never have happened. But my naive, ignorant first generation college student that I was thought, well, they told me med school would be hard and that all these signs about how they try to weed out students of color, and but you just got to stick through it and you got to study and you got to just raise the bar. Yeah, so that lasted all about 4 weeks, and realized that I was overwhelmed with every one of my science classes, and the dream of doing sports medicine was relinquished. Dropped all 4 classes and got four new classes and started a whole new schedule already 4 weeks late into the semester. Um, and so now it was just all right. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna go. So now fast forward, we're at the end of sophomore year, and you have to declare your major. I still didn't know what I was going to do. But because I had to submit paperwork, I looked at my transcripts and I said, well, I'm going to figure out which department, which subject matter I have taken the most classes in, and that's going to be my major. It happened to be philosophy. I had Professor Balmuth, who
Mm-hmm.
we had over the summer of OUS, who
Shout
I
out to
had
Balmond.
also taken 2 classes with during my first and second year at Colgate. Really respected him, liked the way he taught, was really intrigued about philosophy and the idea of logic and critical thinking. And because I had some aspirations about potentially law school, everybody was like, oh, you should be a philosophy major. That'll be good. Except the GPA that I had in my philosophy classes wasn't exactly stellar. It was
Mm.
okay, but I had a really good GPA in sociology classes that I had taken, or
Mm.
SOAN, because I had taken some anthropology and some sociology. And so I did the math. SOAN, I had the best GPA. I had taken a couple classes. I was almost halfway through being with all the requirements, became a SOAN major. And that was it. Now, wasn't so bad because sociology was dope. I really got to, especially when I got to the higher level courses, and I found myself really delving deeper into the subject matter and having professors that really, I think, when you were in your 300 and 400 level courses, really challenged you. So I don't regret being a sociology major. I just regret the way I went about it. And if I could do it over again, I definitely may have explored a few other classes in some other areas. And I might just have gotten some better advising about my pre-med aspirations, and maybe just not taking any science classes in my first year, and got acclimated to university life, academics, and then maybe gradually slid into the sciences sophomore and junior and senior year. And maybe, who know, I'd be Dr. Dubois right now, but it's all good. Point is that that was the how not to pick a major at Colgate University.
Okay, so I came in to Colgate in typical Alvin fashion, not knowing what I wanted to major, what I wanted to be. Um, and then really, did so poorly my first semester freshman year, that if it wasn't for the grades I got during my OUS summer, if I, at the very least, I should have been put on probation, but maybe even had been kicked off. But
Like
I had,
you
you need to
peace.
go. But the grades that I got during the summer, when averaged in,
Yeah,
allowed me
helps
to help. But
salvaged.
so I definitely came back after my first semester with definitely more focus, not much more, but with some focus. And I remember January, the J term,
J term.
where, right, that doesn't exist anymore, but it used to be where you would come back for 2, 3 weeks, take one course during January in between first semester and second semester. And that J term, I took a religion class focused on Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, taught
Oh wow,
by Josiah Young.
Josiah Young
And he totally blew my mind in
flipped
terms
the
of
script on you.
what we talked about the black church, talked about black culture. And also at that time, during my first 2 years, there was a lot of major incidents of discrimination that kind of galvanized the campus and
Mhm.
really, as a student of color, pushed me into wanting to learn more about the black
Mhm.
experience. And at the time at Colgate, if you wanted to take classes that taught about the black experience, many of them were in the religion department at the time
And
because,
why is that? There wasn't an African American studies major.
correct. So a lot of black church courses, a lot of African
Under
traditional
theology.
religion
Yep,
under
yep.
theology, right? So to your point, come sophomore year, the end of sophomore year, when it's time to pick a major, I still don't know what I want to do. But when I reviewed my transcript, when I looked at the number of courses that I had taken in religion, it just made sense. Like, well, you might as well just stay in religion and just finish it out. And so while um,
Those were your
I,
early years in data research. You didn't even know it. You
correct,
was
I was
you
doing
was
some data analysis. In the OUS conference room trying to figure out, like, oh my God, I got to pick a major. And I think while it caused some confusion in my family, because on my mother's side of family, we come from preachers and teachers. So many of my family members heard I was going to be a religion major. They just assumed that I was the preacher of this generation, because every generation in my mother's family, there is a preacher. So
Deacon Al.
they thought, oh my God, my mother was on the phone immediately calling my family members, say, hey, my son's the preacher. He's the one. He's the one. And then I explained to my mother, well, not exactly. This
Oh.
isn't that type of religion training. I'm more about learning about different religions,
Right.
Islam, Judaism,
Yeah.
African traditional religions, and not necessarily how to be a preacher. And plus, trust me, mom, you do not want me as anybody's preacher. But that being said, I would like to introduce our guest this week, Miss Kendra Brim.
Yeah.
Welcome to Applegate.
Hey, thank you for having me. This is great. This is awesome. I wanted to chime in when Jerry was talking too, because I was also on that call, and it was great to see just another avenue where the kids can connect with alum. Like you said, we didn't have that opportunity. I was an OUS grad as well. But it's really great to have those connections before you step on campus, because you just sometimes are lost, right? But you can always pinpoint somebody across campus. You can go to that safe haven like you were talking about, and you know you're home. So it was just great to connect with the kids for sure.
That's fantastic.
It,
Actually,
it's funny how we reference them as kids, you know what I'm
As the
saying?
kids, right? Student kids.
Even though when they were 18, 19 years old,
Right, right.
it's interesting how, and you're still relatively, young in that you
Yeah,
only removed a few years from Colgate,
yes.
versus a few decades as some of us on the call,
some of us. You are a
I'm
class
a
of,
decade plus one,
so
plus 1 year.
you're class of 2000,
11.
2011,
11, 11. Okay,
2011. Okay.
okay.
So let's jump right
Let's
in.
let's segue, kick it out.
Let's jump right in. So, um, I know diversity, inclusion, equity is a big part of who you are, who you've been. But before we get there, let's go back, right?
Hmm.
Back
So
into time.
let's go back into time.
So if you are class of 2011, that means then you come into Colgate 1997, right? So fall
2007.
in
Mm.
2007. You ain't that old.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Right, right,
Nope.
right, right, right. No,
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 no.
don't put me back that far.
no, 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 no,
2007.
not yet, right? Okay,
Not yet. Not yet.
yeah, not yet. Okay, so give us a sense then. Take us back into 2007 for those who might not be familiar. Set the context of what's going on in the world in 2007. What do you remember? What is going on maybe in your high school, in your community that might have impacted you to get to Colgate? Kind of
Mhm.
help set that tone of what things were looking like for you and around your world 2007.
All right, perfect. So bringing it back, 2007, when life was easy, right? No bills, no job, everything was cool, right? Um, but 2007, so I'm from Buffalo, New York. It's only
Hmm.
3 hours and some change from Colgate.
Okay.
And I decided to go to Colgate because obviously it's a great academic school, close to home. But I also was able to play basketball there. So I played all 4 years at Colgate. And when I started Colgate, a lot of people don't know this. I was 16. So I started high school at 12, graduated at 16, came into OUS at 16, and then finished Colgate at 20. So I wasn't even 21 by the time I graduated. That's a
Wow.
whole nother story. Got pushed through academically early in my career. But 2007, come on campus, OUS again was a huge part of building my Colgate career, and came in, played basketball, had great mentors. Like I keep talking about Chev Martin, like love
Hmm.
Chev. Just saw
Hmm.
her a few months ago in Brooklyn, had great conversations with her. Um, and so that was really like my first experience was OUS having my good group of friends there, and then also to having a good group of friends for basketball. My freshman year was not like a typical freshman, obviously, because you're traveling, playing basketball, you're on the court training or whatever the case may be, 4 or 5 hours a day. And then again, coming in at 16, 17, which is very hard for me mentally. But I always attribute my success to a couple of people who are no longer at Colgate, but Dean Bev Lowe, who was dean of first years at the time, Charlotte Johnson, who I believe was a dean of diversity and inclusion for a little bit, and she went on to another school, and then also to Aurelius, who I believe is still there, Aurelius Henderson from OUS. So those three people were really great for me to help me push me through my freshman year. 2008 rolls around. Politically, what happens? Barack Obama is elected president.
Mm.
And it was very interesting being on campus during that time. I look back at the students recently who basically recreated the sit in, right, from I believe the 60s, late 60s at Colgate. Um, and I look at how they have a voice. We had a voice as well, but their voice is powerful, is strong. And I think about what would have they done in 2008. Again, it was a difficult time for our country, but also a time to be proud that we had our first Black president. And a lot of people weren't happy about that on campus, right? Social media wasn't where it was before, so I didn't understand the reactions of the rest of the world. But I know on Colgate, we had a hard time. A lot of people didn't understand, why did we elect a Black president. I lived in HRC, Howland Renaissance Center. Say shout out to HRC.
Shout out to HRC.
Lived
Two
in
years.
HRC 3 years for me. I did 3 years at HRC.
Wow.
Um,
So hold
yeah.
on. So HRC in late 2000s, what does it look like? Because I know HRC has evolved over the years. So is it a
It might have still been in full function when
right,
she was there.
I'm curious, was it an entire dorm? Were there programs going on? What's HRC looking like at the time?
So at HRC at the time, there weren't full out programs, but it was entire dorm.
Okay.
And so we had a mixture of folks, right? Everyone always labeled it as a Black dorm, but we had a mixture of folks. We had Asian students, we had white students, we had mainly OUS students too, but it was a great mixture of people.
Mhm.
And so not a lot of programming, but we also took initiatives to do programming ourselves, outside of the official HRC programming, whether that was on campus, going to other schools, Syracuse, Hamilton.
Mhm.
We did a lot of different things together, and HRC was, like I said, my safe haven, but also too, it was close to the court, so I didn't have to travel up and down the hill as much to Cotterill Court. So it was very strategic doing that way too. But HRC, when Barack Obama was elected, I remember literally everyone shouting from their dorm rooms, just shouting, screaming, crying, so much emotions. And I remember that evening, and we had a group of students, white students, come into our dorm, and they were upset, calling us all type of names.
What?
um yes. The next day we actually had people write derogatory things on a dorm, not dorm, an academic building bathroom, to
Wow.
a point where it was our safety was questioned. And so I think about that time, right? And then I think about the students recently who did a sit-in in the admissions office. And I think about how powerful that moment was, and how it was just a climax for everything that was happening during that time. So, again, 2008 was a very pivotal moment for me in college. I remember watching the inauguration right before going to basketball practice, and tears streaming from my eyes, and then I had to cut it short to go to basketball practice.
And you
But
was
that was
walking into practice like, give me the
Wagner.
ball.
We got a black president.
Back up off me.
Yeah, so, and then again, fast forward, I was able in the next couple of years just to really navigate the world, understand what it means to truly be a black woman. Again, social media wasn't where it is now. Even in
Mhm.
2011, we had Facebook, but Instagram was, I think, fairly new. Of course, we didn't have Snapchat or anything like that.
Mhm.
But at the same time, we were still able, even though we were small school on the hill, we were still able to be connected to the world. And I am grateful for the Colgate education, because they made that imperative for us. They allowed us to have, even athletes, they allowed us to do different opportunities. I was saying to OUS students earlier this week that because I wasn't able to do a study abroad trip, and it was really important for me, I was able to reach out to OUS as well as Dean Lowe, even though she was no longer my dean, to say, is there any way I could do a study abroad trip? And they allowed me to go to Australia for 3 months with the school after graduation.
Mm,
And so I was
Wow.
able to study in Australia, and full expenses paid
nice. Post graduation.
post graduation. And
Wow.
that's what I'm saying. Like, Colgate really definitely fosters the full student.
I'm
So
about
let
to
me
hit him
ask
up
you.
and say, yo, can I go to
I mean,
Australia
it's
now?
it's only been 30 years. It's only been 30 years.
Some stuff I gotta follow up on.
Write that down. Take a note. So we go back for a second to high school. In terms of your experience as a student athlete, were you recruited? Were you? What was your career like at Colgate? Like, so give me a sense of that perspective.
That bridge from high school, from Buffalo at that to Hamilton.
Buffalo to Hamilton. So I'm 6 feet tall. A lot of people don't realize that, especially during Zoom. But I'm 6 feet tall. I've always been
Okay.
6 feet since I was 12 years old, since I was between eighth grade and freshman year. And so, but I was always goofy. I was just a really goofy athlete. But I really honed in on my skill during high school. Went to a lot of different camps, was sponsored by a travel AAU team out of Syracuse.
Mm,
And so I would travel to Syracuse all the time for
mm-hmm.
practice, and then travel across the country, sponsored by Adidas, for a few years as well. And I just want to say, like, I really attribute that success to my parents, because a lot of parents wouldn't drive their kid to Syracuse,
I was
two
about to
hours from
say.
Colgate.
I was about to
I
say.
mean,
Hold
from
up.
Colgate, from Buffalo.
Buffalo and Syracuse isn't like a suburb, right? So
Right.
Buffalo is not like right around the corner. As you're talking, I'm
two
like,
two
But
hours, two
that's
and
a
a half
hike.
hours, and it was on
it,
the other side of Syracuse, like closer to, um, like it wasn't just right off the 90. It was deep in Syracuse. And
Gotcha.
so if anyone knows, 90 is the big interstate
oh
going
yeah.
across New
Interstate.
York
That's the
State.
Oh yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so it's not right off the 90. And my parents would pick me up from school, and when I was not in season, pick me up from school, and then shuffle me off to Syracuse, and I would do my homework in the car, and then go to practice and shuffle me back. And then I would wake up in the morning, 5 a.m., go to the court, practice, shoot 1,000 shots before school, go down the street to school, go to practice. It was just a rotation. And so my mom was the driver, literally the driver down the 90, and my dad was the one who's like, you got to make sure that your studies are on point. But make sure also too, like you're taking care of yourself. Like he was really big on that as well. So when I came out of school, the name is Nardin Academy, where I currently work, which is a story within itself. When I graduated Nardin, I had 19 full scholarship for D1 basketball. And so
That's what's up.
I remember sitting at the kitchen table, 19 schools right in front of me, like, where do I go? They range from low D1, high D1, all the way down to Florida, up to Connecticut, across near the Mississippi. Like it was all around.
You had
Um,
options.
I had options. I
Why
had options,
Colgate?
but I also knew and I don't know how I knew, but I knew that at 16 years old, basketball is not end all be all. And so I decided on Colgate because, like I said, it's a really great academic school.
Hmm.
And my knees and my back are going to retire at some point. So I needed that great education when I came out to fuel me into the real world. And so that's the reason why I made the decision to go to Colgate.
And it was still in central New York.
And
So
it was in
it
Central New
it,
York. It was
it
three
kept
hours
you
away.
at 16. I'm thinking, okay, there's still that affinity to be close to home to some extent versus being somewhere across the country and mom and dad can come see me play home games and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. And I still had my parents sign everything because NCAA did not allow you to sign if you were under 18. So
Mm.
anything that I had to do on campus, I had to send those papers back home for 2 years to have them sign it.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And did mom and dad play ball? Were they athletes as well? Or what was the influence of sports?
Um, so my dad was an athlete. He played he played basketball for a little bit, but he primarily was a track and field athlete. And then when he got into his 30s, he was a bodybuilder. So my dad loved all things athletics. And actually, growing up, I did not want to do any athletics. I wanted to play piano and dance, which I did. But my older brother, so I have an older brother who's 17 years older and a younger brother who's 17 months younger. And I remember talking to my older brother and I'm watching him play basketball at 6 years old. And I said, can you teach me how to play basketball? And he's like, you're going to have to ask dad that question. Like, I can't do that for you. And my dad said to me, which was really smart, when I was 6, he said, are you sure you want to do it? And I said, yeah. He's like, it is a tough mental game. And at that time, it was in the 90s, not that long ago. But think about this, WNBA was just came into to
Existence.
light in 1996. And so mid 90s, asking my parents to play basketball, they had no idea, how to even make that happen. There weren't really many women's or girls leagues, so I played with boys. And so that's why I always say for girls now who are playing basketball, make sure you play with boys because the game has evolved so much. Many girls, they will go into all girls leagues, but the boys can teach you that tenacity, that hard work, that grit that women cannot always teach you, especially early on. So it was a really great time to learn how to play basketball. But my dad and my brother really taught me the mental piece more so than the physical piece.
Nice. 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 So with now that you kind of set the stage for how you entered Colgate and gave us a little flashback on, what was happening in the world, particularly around the elections of Obama. When you look at the 4-year tenure you had there, what were some of those highlights? What do you reflect on as the accomplishments for whether personal, academic, milestones that are not the most common celebrated, but that you celebrate as your accomplishments at Colgate.
Yeah. So I would say the first thing is graduating. Not a lot of African American people can actually say that they have the ability and can afford to go to school. I mean, I went to Colgate on a full ride, did not have to pay one dime back, and so for that I am grateful, especially as we have this discussion about student loans. Now, I have grad school student loans for my MBA, but undergrad, and you know how much Colgate costs. That is an accomplishment within itself. So I'm grateful for that. The other things is obviously forming friends. Like you both are friends throughout the years, and I still have really close friends that I actually just went to New York City to visit 2 weeks ago, and that was a great time there as well. But again, the education, the connections between professors that I still have, I think allowed me to be in the position that I'm in today and shaped who I am today. Never did I think, we talked about this too earlier this week, never did I think I would be in education. But we're always teaching someone along the way because someone is teaching us. And so I say those are all accomplishments. Now we know, obviously, being the small minority at Colgate, there's a lot of lessons learned within that. Um, and I had some tough lessons learned. Being outside of Chev, being the only Black player on the team, on the basketball team, was very difficult. Some of the conversations I had with my coach was very difficult. I wasn't able to necessarily name some of the things that I was going through, but today we call them microaggressions, macroaggressions, racism, discrimination, all those different things that I think sometimes we don't want to talk about and sometimes we forget. But at the same time, it allowed me, like I said, to be in the position that I'm in today. One thing that I don't really talk about as much, when I was at Colgate, I remember writing a letter to my coach after I graduated, or right before I graduated, just to make her aware of some of the things that she was doing and saying to Black players and against Black players, of our opponents. Again, like I said, we will label those as microaggressions today. And I remember in that letter I wrote, I will always fight for girls who come behind me. I don't know how I'll do it, but I will always fight for the girls that come behind me in the spaces that I occupy. I will always speak up and stand out, or speak up and stand up for girls who cannot do that themselves at an age that I wasn't able to do it, from 16 to 20. And so it's crazy how things are full circle, being a director of diversity and inclusion now, and I'm standing up for those girls who I said I would stand up for 10 years ago.
Can we just dig a little deeper on these micro and macro aggressions in such a terminology that I think that although we can deduct what they might reference, but in particularly to the experiences at Colgate, because without even knowing the full context of the definition, I would have to say that Alvin and I shared quite a few micro and macro aggressions in our 4 years there, and a term that didn't even exist in
That's what I'm saying.
87 through 91. So I'm being educated right now to help with my healing process 30 years later.
Yeah, so you're asking the definitions of microaggressions and
Please,
macroaggressions, or?
for our international audience, yes.
Yes. So microaggressions, macroaggressions, the best way I could describe them is a mosquito, right? We know mosquitoes are annoying. Mosquitoes are always around us, buzzing, trying to get at us, you know. And that's what microaggressions are, those little small comments that are annoying, but also too will affect us down the line, right? Mosquito bites you, you have a bump, you may get red, whatever the case may be. So for example, with microaggression is, and I get this all the time because it just happens. Oh my gosh, I don't know what Kendra's going to show up today because you're always changing your hair. Microaggression. As it relates to basketball, it's don't be afraid of them because all they do is play basketball.
Ooh.
Microaggressions. Those are the things that over the years were a buildup, and that's what brought me to write that letter to my coach to say this is not right. You know, I remember one time I was told by my coach, again, freshman year, I had a very difficult time being just young, trying to navigate, being a Black woman on an athletic team, an all-white team, essentially, very hard. And so my grades were not where they needed to be. And I remember my coach saying to me one time, "Oh, I know you're having a difficult time because you came from the hood. You don't know where I came from. You just are assuming." That's a microaggression. So certain things like that, where we weren't able to name them and call them out, but it definitely affected me for sure. It affects your self-esteem. It affects your grades. It affects how you navigate around campus. But going back to that OUS community, I was so grateful to be in OUS because I can always go back to that safe haven. Same thing with HRC. HRC was my safe haven. And so, you know, we identify those safe spaces, but like we said earlier, you belong and don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. And I know we'll probably get there. Like, what would you say to your 21-year-old self? In my case, 20-year-old self is you belong. And I'm so grateful that I wrote that letter back to my coach.
Mm, mm. There we go.
Wow. Yeah, that's what's up. That's what's up. And very powerful into what Jerry said. Definitely something we can relate to, and I'm sure many who listen to this call will relate
Hmm.
to.
Hmm.
So let me. You kind of touched on some of the things that you really appreciated about Colgate. So I'm curious to know. Um, it's been, I guess, about a decade since you graduated.
Hmm.
Are there aspects of that experience that you miss?
Oh, yes, for sure. I think just from a college student perspective, again, you miss just being yourself. When you're in college, you're at a point where you're not necessarily an adult, but you're still an adult, if that makes sense. And so, what I'm grateful for, what Colgate specifically, is that the liberal arts college, the small liberal arts college that Colgate is, it allowed us to explore and think about different aspects of the world and how we are positioned in our world. And so I remember taking just different courses. So I started off as a mathematical econ major. I don't know who said that that was okay for me to be a mathematical econ major.
Yeah.
I was like, no, that was a semester. That was
Oh,
a
yeah, at least you
semester.
got through a semester.
Yes. I was like, this is not for me. Loved it in high school, but yet no.
Yeah.
But
Yet
that was
no.
one of the best decisions that I probably, yeah. So it's probably one of the best decisions I made. What I'm grateful about Colgate is that they did not say, you have to do this and you have to be
Hmm.
this. They allowed us to explore what our passions are and what we want to be and how we see ourselves. So I was able to take a lot of different courses, sociology courses, psychology courses, religion courses, and where I ended up was political science. My major was political science. My minor was African American studies. And actually going back to the context of where were we in when I was in college, 2008 really fueled me into the political science arena. I was totally engulfed in politics. Loved every aspect about politics, even though it's dirty, it's nasty. I still love politics. I don't talk about politics out in the public sometimes, but even locally in Buffalo, I participate in so many different political arenas, but kind of behind the scenes. But Colgate allowed me to do that, right? Because they really empowered us to make those decisions. But then also too, the other thing that I really love about Colgate was that the connections, right?
Mm.
The connections, the alum that will come back. I talked about We Funk earlier. I was like, I don't know if We Funk still exists, but I remember the We Funk parties. I remember remember AOC coming back. I remember going to New York City for a weekend for one of the AOC events.
Hmm.
That alumni connection is so strong. Even on the call earlier this week with OUS, I saw Joy from New York, and now she
Yes.
lives in DC. And I was like, Joy, oh my gosh, like, and I
Hmm.
love the fact that she's still so connected
Yep.
years later, and Joy would come back and talk to us, right? And so that's the reason why I come back and I talk to students. I was away for a while, not gonna lie. I was somewhat bitter about my Colgate basketball experience, my overall experience. So I stayed away, but I'm like, no, it's bigger than you. And so that's why I come back and I talk to alum. And so it's really great to have that connection as well.
Shout out to first. Shout out to Joy. Uh, I have met her before, and she is a future guest.
Guess.
So she's
Yes,
already on the roster, on the calendar.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
she's awesome.
audience, she is awesome. I agree. I agree. But also shout out to you for making that shift and evolving and growing because one of the consistent themes that we've heard from our guests is that it does make a difference as students. We know the engagement that we've had with alumni can make a difference. And then I think it makes for a richer alumni experience because
Hmm.
you tend to have access to this network of AOC, not just the ones you went to school with, but you start meeting ones who now can have impact on each other's careers and you would never cross paths before. So
Right.
good to hear that you made that shift.
Yeah.
If I can interject also, and yet it's interesting because the blessing and the curse of what you described and what many of our guests have reflected on is that there was that need to disconnect upon graduating and sort of going through your own soul searching before you figured out on your on just your own timeline when it was time to reconnect. And one of the things that we've realized and that with this platform is we want to sort of create an opportunity where we can not dismiss the need to heal and go through that process,
Mhm.
but maybe minimize the time that's needed. Clearly, there's something that's common amongst decades and generations of alum of color who are going through this process of an experience that is bountiful and opens up the world, but yet treacherous and makes them have to sort of figure out things within themselves that we don't even have words for, and then figure out, well, wait a minute, I owe it to come back, not only to just because I've healed, but because there are those who came behind me who need me to be there. So you just testified to that, and super dope, super dope. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course. And alum also, they make me better, right? And it's like I can't sit back and see and watch other alum give it back. And I'm just like, oh yeah, you guys can have it. Like that's all you,
Y'all do that.
right? Y'all do
That
that y'all thing.
competitive spirit comes out. So let's take a break. We're
Mhm.
going to take a pause for the cause and allow our sponsor to get some shine, and then we'll return back and wrap up this conversation with Kendra. So, this episode is sponsored by Hope Murals. Hope Murals is a nonprofit that provides adolescent youth with an interactive experience of creative expression via an urban arts platform that stimulates both mental and physical development. Please visit their website at www.hopemurals.org to learn more and find ways you can support the work they do. Just want to welcome everybody back and always want to thank our sponsor, Hope Murals. Always great to hear what you do. And if you're ever in my office, make sure you check out my new art that was facilitated through some of the professional development that Hope Murals is doing around the country. So shout out to Hope Murals. And if you are interested in being a sponsor, please send us an email at aftergatepodcast@gmail.com. Also, want to, before we dive in, show some love to our network, Defy Life. And if you are looking for dope shows like this, make sure you go to the Defy Life Network podcast hub at www.defylifepods.com. You can also find us on major podcast streaming services such as Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio. And also, if you want some written content, check out our written content at www.godefylife.com. And also check out the branded apparel, which is the dope merchandise at defylifegear.com. And definitely stay tuned for the pending Aftergate merchandise that's coming
Yo.
down the pipeline. So
Can't wait for that one.
make sure you cop that. Definitely make sure you cop that because we're gonna have crazy designs. Definitely stay tuned for the Aftergate merchandise. On that note, I'll pass the mic to my co-host, Mr. Dubois.
So as we, sort of come out of the tumultuous year of 2020, and there's this sense of social awakening, which I think it's funny when I hear that because I'm like, yeah, I've been woke, y'all just getting a cup of coffee and realizing like what's going on. But with that being said, and now this whole movement across the country to sort of raise not only sort of awareness but become more sensitive to some of the injustices that have plagued many communities of color throughout the decades and throughout history. We know now that the buzz term is diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's now popping up in corporate America, popping up in higher ed. It's part of policies and all. So, as somebody who serves in that role professionally, someone who was a student at a university that could probably benefit from programming and policy of such. Where do you stand on the recommendations of what that could look like in a real life practical campus life for students of color right now, 2021, over the next 4 years at Colgate? What would that, you know, what would those recommendations be like coming from someone who has your expertise?
Yeah. So, like you said, DEI is the buzzword, but many of us have been living, breathing, sleeping, eating all this for years. And back in 2020, with the world really having a racial reckoning, um, it was a lot of conversations. It was, hey, let's read this book, let's do this healing circle, let's do X, Y, and Z. And so now that we're in 2021, I always say, what do we do past the conversations? Move past the conversations, and how do we put that into action? We are past the healing circles. We're past the books, even though reading books are obviously always great because you can never stop learning. But what does that look like in practice? And so we know when we are educating our students, putting a DEI lens on everything that we do, we're creating students who are prepared and ready for the world. What I like to say, at the high school level where I work, we are graduating champions of equity and justice. And we know that leads to higher innovation across teams, creativity. When we're looking at graduating Colgate grads and putting them into the real world, right? Because we always talk about how strong our alumni connection is, and how, you can really get an internship, a job anywhere in the world because there's Colgate grads everywhere. But who are you really putting in these seats? Who are you putting at these board tables? You are putting, and hopefully you are putting students who are just open to new ideas, conversations. And I always say what DEI is just communication, right? It's learning to communicate amongst different types of people. And we know that we have multiple communication barriers, but we have to work on that and we have to practice that. So when we're looking at graduating a Colgate grad, we want to make sure that these students are able to communicate with not just people who look like them, but people all across the world. And when I also have my own consulting business within DEI as well. It's called Savannah Consulting. And when I go into organizations and businesses, I always start with the bottom line. How is your bottom line going to progress? Putting a DEI lens on things. And that is making sure you have diverse teams, inclusive teams, right? Right now I'm working with a construction company, and we're really looking at how, when you have diverse teams, your overall safety on the road will be better. Your safety protocol, will be tightened up. You won't have as many mistakes. And so you look at that. You look at, again, innovation, creativity. Your dollar is going to increase at any organization when you have diverse teams. And so when we go back to a school like Colgate and we're saying we are a leader in education, what does that truly mean? And that is making sure that we are putting a DEI lens, like I said, on everything. That is from athletics, that is from in the classroom, that is starting at the fundamental level of, yes, training all of the faculty and staff, everyone who is involved at Colgate, training our students, making sure we're learning how to communicate with each other. And then also too, I always say we have to not just look at things from a racial and ethnicity lens or gender lens, look at accessibility, right? Colgate, yes, is a school on the hill, as we like to call it, but are there other ways that kids can assess certain or access certain buildings while on campus if you are handicapped or if you have a disability or whatever the case may be? So let's look at everything from a DEI lens and let's put that into practice. Looking at recently the DEI plan that Colgate put out last year, I've been really following that and really making sure that Colgate is doing everything that they said they're going to do. And I will say it's happening, right?
Okay.
I mean, I was so happy to hear about, I think I was reading where the applications went up by like well over 100% this year, obviously because of everything with COVID. They didn't really have testing, all these different things, but our diversity numbers went through the roof. And it wasn't because, oh, let's be intentional of trying to fill these seats with Black and brown kids. It was because we have this third century plan. We have it where I think tuition is either reduced or there's no tuition for, if you have a certain income level.
So
Yes. And
if you
so I'm like,
are under
80,000.
80,000, it is eliminated.
it is eliminated. That is huge. We talk
Word.
about barriers. I mean, that is the first thing before you can even get on campus, the barriers that are presented to so many people. And the first one is tuition. So to say that your tuition is eliminated at a certain income level, I mean, you're already driving diversity numbers. You're driving that innovation that you need. You're driving that creativity. And so Colgate, it is and will continue to be a leader because they're taking those actionable steps. But now we have our kids on campus or our students on campus. We have to make sure we're creating that inclusive environment, and we know that starts from student life, right? So it is really educating and training the leaders who are part of student life, who are part of these clubs, who are part of all these different activities, and what does that truly mean? And you have to be intentional about it. And then also too, when there is something that is just not right, I mean, we've all experienced and we've all seen things on campus that was like, that's just not right.
Hmm.
Colgate needs to hold students, faculty, and staff accountable.
Would that be a micro, a mid, or a macro aggression? Like what?
All in
Where does
between,
that fall
micro,
All
into?
of that.
micro, macro, all those.
Okay, okay.
But
I'm learning.
but you know what? In my role at my high school now, I mean, so just to put it in perspective, the high school that I work at, it's basically a mini Colgate. And
Mm,
what that means is it's a private school located in the heart of the city of Buffalo, but it seems like there's this invisible fence around it. We talk about access. It is $18,000 a year to go there. We start at basically pre-K, what we call Montessori. That starts at about 15,000 and goes all the way up to 18,000 in high school, and it becomes an all-girls school in high school.
mm,
We have legacy families, what I like to call it, in our school. Those who give crazy amount of money,
Hmm.
and so they feel as if sometimes they can run the school, right? And so what they talk about at the dinner table, the kitchen table, translates to what is being said and talked about in our hallways. So if a student comes with a microaggression, or just says something that's just not okay, I mean, we know there were a lot of comments made after George Floyd's murder. Um, Traditionally, what would happen is nothing, number one. But if something did happen, it would be like, okay, well, you're suspended, and then you could come back and resume regular student life. Well, with my position, I don't believe in just suspending a kid and never talking to them again. During that time, we do in-school suspension, but then we also to work with them to do some type of healing process or a conversation, or what kind of restorative practices are we putting in place so that they're thinking about what they're saying and did, and that is not okay. Because guess what? When you go to college, that is really not going to be okay. And some of the things that you're saying and putting on social media can ruin the rest of your life. So let's talk about it now. Let's not just suspend you and be done. Let's talk about it now.
ruin the rest
And
of
so
your life and get you punched in the face. I mean, just
that
because
too. I didn't want to say that part, but yes, that too.
but yeah, exactly. I mean, that's when it goes from the micro to the macro aggression.
Yes.
So quick question. So with Colgate, I know there was a search going on for a DEI. I don't know if it's an officer or a
Mm-hmm.
director or all. Was that something you were entertaining? Were you in the mix for? Was it something that you were not even trying to like? Nah, I don't want to do that. I'm back in Buffalo now.
I
What do you thought?
actually, when I saw it posted, I was, first of all, I was ecstatic because that position actually existed when I was in school. It was held by a guy named Keenan Grinnell, who was really awesome when I was there too. And then it was cut. So I was really happy that
Mm,
came about again. I did not entertain it. However, I always look at where do I want to be 5 years, 10 years from now. And I always look at job descriptions. I know they're changing, but I always say, is that something that I can do? How can I get to that next level? Um, and so that is something that I hope to aspire to 5 to 10 years from now. But in Buffalo, I always say I have a nice setup. I love Buffalo.
mhm.
Buffalo is my home. I'm able to have a great career here, doing, what I love, working with kids, having consulting, doing a podcast, just have so many passion projects going on, that I don't know where it may land, but I was definitely happy to see that Colgate added that to their staff.
Well, I'm
So
going to endorse a consulting role for you to support the DEI efforts of the university, and raise the bar a little bit with a little sort of a compliance function that you could serve to make sure that they ain't just talking the talk, but they walking the walk.
Yes, yes. And
She said,
we talk about,
I will
yeah, we
take
talk
that
about that all the
contract.
time. I would take that contract. Let me send that email right after we
Right.
get off this call.
Right, right,
That's right.
right.
Because data and metrics is what will hold you accountable, right? Let's
Absolutely.
look at those dashboards. Let's look at those scorecards. Let's look at all that. I came from a health insurance company prior to this, and that was my other passion too, was looking at data, even though I was terrible at math. But
I'm a
look at the
data
data.
dude. I'm
He's
a
a
data
D. Yep,
dude.
yep, yep,
Outcome
yep.
measurement is big, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
Bong, I just want to like again, as I'm listening here and just kind of being blown away from what you're sharing and how you're breaking it down. I am one thoroughly impressed and just
Thank you.
learning as you're sharing.
Mhm.
And two, you are confirmation of exactly why we are doing this podcast so that we can one get to know each other and build relationships amongst us, right? Because we
Right.
ain't just doing this for those who listening. I'll be real transparent. I'm doing this because I want to meet more and more great individuals, and
Mm-hmm.
my co-host does as well. But I also am doing this. We are doing this because we want to showcase amazing individuals and just continue to just affirm this idea that there are some alumni of color that you may or may not be aware of. You may or may have not went to school with them while you was there, but trust and believe there are some amazing Colgate ALC people out there doing things, changing the world, making this place better for those who
Always.
come behind them, right? So shout out to Kendra. Here's
Thank
what I'd
you.
like to know. As you talked about who you are, what you do, I want to get there. I want to get to that point of what you're doing right now. But before we get there, share that journey. Give us a sense of what you have been, who you've been, what were you doing after Colgate. Kind of walk us from graduation to who you are now.
Okay, so graduated in 2011. Right after that, again, like I said, had the opportunity to go to Australia, which literally probably delayed, me going into the real world a little bit. But it was again great experience. So came back to Buffalo and I was working different jobs. Joined AmeriCorps,
Oh
and worked
wow.
as as a AmeriCorps member for a little bit.
Oh
Worked as
wow.
a volunteer coordinator for a small not-for-profit called Hearts and Hands, really making sure that we provide transportation to the elderly and disabled in rural areas in Western New York. So that was a really great opportunity. And then from there, I started in a sales position selling Medicare to the elderly through Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Western New York. And then was able to kind of fast track my career through there and worked in risk management, worked in product management. I worked as a project manager as well. And all throughout that time, I was also coaching basketball did it for 8 seasons at back at Nardin where I am now, but then also other schools, travel AAU teams. I had the benefit of actually coaching in Thailand for a few,
Wow.
which was awesome because no one spoke English, but our common language was basketball.
That's it.
So that had that opportunity to do that. And then I also received my MBA from University of Buffalo as well. So that was in my 10-year span out of college, which was basically all my 20s. And during that time, still trying to figure out who I was. I was just always grinding.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I don't want to keep grinding. Like, it's awesome. People always just say, how do you have so much energy? I'm like, I just do it. Also, during that time, I joined the Buffalo Urban League,
Mhm.
specifically Buffalo Urban League Young Professionals, which I always say saved my life because I was able to be rooted and grounded in an organization that focused on social justice and equity. And I think that
Mhm.
was where my passion to work in DEI work started. So I also became the vice president and the president of the organization in Buffalo. And then I currently sit on the National Urban League Young Professionals Board as their programs chair, and hopefully to be their next vice president for national. So that's like my journey in my 10 years.
Mhm.
crazy. And when I put that
Crazy.
in like just a nutshell, like, oh my gosh, I accomplished so much. But at the same time, like I said, I didn't want to keep grinding.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember last year, so I'm a person that I rely heavily on my faith. And so last year I remember praying and saying, God, where are you going to lead me? I don't know what's next. I'm going to be obedient, but where
Mm.
are you going to lead me? And I was talking to a few friends. Then everything happened with the pandemic, and then everything happened with George Floyd murder.
Mm.
And I was just so fueled, and I had so much fire, and I was just so upset, but I didn't know how to channel that. Again, having my own consulting company, Savannah Consulting, I was working with many organizations, specifically the school that I work for now. And I said to them, because they started to increase the amount of work and hours that they wanted out of me, I said, you need someone full time to do this position. So I wrote the job description, and I'm like, this is what you prayed for. Like, you prayed to have a position where you have sustainable impact. You
Hmm.
wrote the job description. Kendra, go for the interview.
Hmm.
And I had one interview, and I am in that position today. So within the past year, I've switched careers, from project management within Blue Cross and Blue Shield to diversity and inclusion work, at my school, Nardin Academy. My consulting business is going well. I started a podcast with my friend. We're on season 3. It's called Black Gems Dive In Podcast. So it's with my friend Akua Men's Adu, who is from Syracuse actually, but now lives in Buffalo. And she's a chief diversity officer at a healthcare company here in Buffalo. So that is going extremely well. And then also, I am writing a book called The Six Figure Athlete, or co-authoring a book called The Six Figure Athlete. Um, so things are going great. It's
Life
like
is great.
you plant those seeds early. You know,
Hmm.
you appreciate the grind during when you're going through. You're like, I don't know what this means, but I'm just gonna do it anyways. So you appreciate it, and you rely, like I said, rely on my faith, and that's what fuels me throughout the day.
You have given me a phrase that describes a lot of what I do in my life, that I'm a still in passion projects. So
Hmm.
I,
Hmm.
I I talked about in one of the podcasts that I was an RCU DJ, and that was a passion project, and it has
Hmm.
definitely been something that I've tried to keep in my life um, since then. Give us a
Hmm.
little synopsis on the podcast. Like, you gave us a title, but what is it about, and kind of what are the objectives of the podcast?
Yeah. So again, we started the podcast just from a conversation. My friend who he produces the podcast. He has Cruise Control Media Network, and so he produces a podcast. And we were talking about how can we talk about everything that's going on around us, what we're experiencing, without necessarily attaching our official titles to our name,
Hmm.
because you don't want to speak for the organization that you work for. So
Right.
we decided to start a podcast. And so what we talk about is all things diversity, equity, inclusion, right? We talk about things that are affecting us, from a worldly view to Buffalo specifically. We talk about from politics to, again, microaggressions. We talk about specific incidences and things that are happening in our world today.
Hmm.
And we talk about what shapes us as young Black professionals. That I think that is something, a lot of people are, especially Buffalo. Buffalo is a very unique city, very unique. We are um, a small city that sits on the lake. We used to have a population of, I think, around 700,000 at one point, and this is when my parents were younger. We are currently at 250,
Hmm.
dwindling population, and also the young
Wow.
Black, yeah, the young Black network or professional network is also dwindling. And so a lot of companies will go to myself or other people and ask, how do we attract and retain young Black professionals in the city of Buffalo? And so we always say, listen to our podcast. But we talk about everything from, our dating experience to nightlife to family life to, our jobs. Like, all that we talk about within our podcast. And then we have different guests, locally from Buffalo, but also too across the country as well.
Fantastic. And
Awesome.
awesome
Awesome.
career. Looking forward to continue to see uh, some of those projects come to fruition, and keep
Yes.
doing what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I know you sort of echoed it earlier in the show, but I think it's worth highlighting, and give maybe if you want to expound upon it. But if you had to look back now to the 16-year-old Kendra going into Colgate with what you know now, what might be the advice you would give her? And then the follow up to that would be, what would be your advice to the Colgate graduate 20-year-old Kendra now going into the world? If you can reflect on your last 10 years, what would that advice be?
Whew. So I'm gonna say for my 16-year-old self, do not rely on anybody else for your happiness.
Mm,
That I was a person who tried to be accepted in so many different social circles, and with other people, dating life, all those different things. I had a boyfriend at Colgate all 4 years who followed me to Colgate. That's another story for another day.
Whoa.
you didn't mention that when we were
That's
talking about what
that,
your four
that's
years
that
was
other
like.
podcast.
That's the other
It's another
podcast.
podcast. That's
Gotcha,
another
gotcha,
podcast.
gotcha.
She didn't bring
Uh,
him up and what did you miss? Nah, no, none of that.
but I would say at 16, do not rely on other people for your happiness. That was something that I was looking for, that validation within other people, other groups, like I said. And I was still just trying to find myself at 16. So that's something that I would tell my 16-year-old self is to not look for that validation.
Mhm, mhm,
As a 21-year-old self, I would say you belong. We talked about, I mean, we talked
mhm,
about that earlier this
mhm,
week. You belong. I had a lot of self-esteem issues. And again, I couldn't really call it out and understand what it was. But I think at some points in my life, I was just a shell, and I would just kind of like bring myself to a small little place. Being 6 feet, being a Black woman, being in an all white space, I didn't know how to navigate. And so I
mhm,
was always making myself small. But we talk about what the Colgate prepare you for. It prepares you for the real world, because that's what the real world looks like.
mhm,
And so I would tell my 20-year-old self, you belong. Don't let anyone else tell you that you don't. Do not make yourself small. Make sure that you are in these spaces and places and own it.
mhm,
And I would say I did not really truly believe in that until the past, I would say, 2 years. So 2 weeks
mm.
ago was my 31st birthday. And
Happy birthday.
so thank you. So again, like I said, 11 years ago when I graduated Colgate, um, I didn't believe that. I didn't know how to, like I said, didn't know how to navigate. I would always keep doing all these things around the community, and I'm like, but I'm not worth it.
Mm.
Um, but 2 years ago, like I said, I was just like, no, you belong. And one thing I want to plug in there is therapy help with that. And do not be afraid to go to therapy. I know that may be something that a lot of Black people don't do,
Mhm,
and say,
mhm.
we don't go to therapy, but therapy works.
Mhm.
So that was part of my healing journey and process as well.
Amen.
Amen. Happy belated birthday. That was
Thank you.
good. So we have a Colgate question that we
Yes.
throw at all of our guests. Different question every week.
Hmm.
Question for you. Is there a time during your Colgate experience that kind of stands out that you could kind of point to that say, you know what? That has something to do with who I turned out to be as a professional.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
She said, wait a
Yes.
minute. You want one per year, per semester? Like,
Bring it.
which one you want me to go
No,
back to?
yes, no. I mean, I talk about the people and the professors and the deans who truly had your back.
Mm,
And I talk about just a minute ago of you belong and don't be afraid to occupy these spaces. I had a professor who was also my advisor, Professor Nina Moore, from the political science department. When I tell you, this woman, I remember the Cat Williams joke where he was like, Michelle Obama is the first lady in the United States, and she walked into the room and she smelled like motions and cocoa butter. This was Professor Nina Moore, right? Like she was.
Here I am. Feel me,
Yes.
see me, smell
See
me.
me,
But
smell
I'm
me, look
gonna.
at my luxurious
It
hair.
don't matter.
Like,
But I'm gonna do my thing though.
Right.
I got my Louis Vuitton bag. Like it was
In Hamilton.
Yeah, yes, in Hamilton, right? But she lived in Syracuse. She lived in Syracuse, but she
was
came
smart.
with her pumps. Yes, and so this woman was like a mother from home, a mother away from home for me, and she did not take any stuff. And you would have thought, oh yeah, well she's a Black professor, she'll have some sympathy and empathy, and she knows I'm playing basketball and I can't get my stuff in on time. Nope. But a lot of people would talk about her and say, oh my gosh, she's so mean. Oh my gosh, she's so harsh. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. But I look back at it, I'm like, she was one of the strongest people that I know. She would drop gems on us and we wouldn't even know it. But I remember one time I was in her office and I was doubting myself, like, do I belong here at Colgate? And she said, you belong. Like, don't let anyone else tell you don't belong. Occupy these spaces that you're in and be proud of who you are. She would always say that, be proud of who you are. And, at the time I'm like 19, sitting in her office, like, but I'm failing, like, whatever, like, let me get my gym bag and go down to the gym, like, goes completely over your head, right? But I stayed in contact with her over the years. I remember seeing her at reunion and I almost literally cried when I hugged her because she has such a huge impact in my life, from a point of how do you show up in a room, how do you present yourself, how you don't back down to anybody, even if they're talking mess about you, because why, they may be intimidated because you're a strong Black woman, those type of things. And I attribute that to her at Colgate. And so that's the one experience that I truly remember, and someone who had a huge and profound impact in my life.
And her name again was Nina?
Professor Nina Moore.
Nina Moore. Okay.
She was also like a commentator on C-SPAN for a little bit. She was sometimes start up on CNN. Like, she was a powerhouse.
All right, that's what's up.
And Colgate snatched her up. All right.
This has been awesome. So here's our chance to give you an opportunity to promote and give our listeners a chance to reach out, connect, support whatever initiative, passion project.
Yeah, there's no shameless plugs here.
Website. The floor is yours. Go at it.
Oh my gosh. So actually I'm in the middle of making one cohesive website because I have so many passion projects going on. But you can contact me generally at kendrabrim@gmail.com or Savannah SAVANNAH _KAY on Instagram. Savannah is my middle name, so Savannah _K on Instagram, and I'm also on Facebook, Kendra Brim. If you want to listen to the podcast, Black Gems Dive In podcast, you can find us at Black Gems Dive In on Instagram, and then we're also on all streaming devices, Spotify. We're on Apple podcasts, all those different things. And like I said, one of the biggest passion projects that I have going on, or two, is my consulting business, Savannah Consulting. And then also two, my co-authoring of a book called The Six Figure Athlete, which will be out in September. I think that is it.
Bang, bang, bang. Bang, bang.
But yeah, I have a lot of things going on. But generally, you can find me on Facebook, Kendra Brim, or Instagram, Savannah _K.
Man, this has been all that in a bag of chips with some hot sauce. I just want to say thank you, not just for the conversation, not just all of the jewels that you dropped and sharing. I just want to thank you for responding and being quick to be willing to come on our show. So
of course. I saw Jerry early this week and I was like, oh, Jerry, I owe you an email.
We are out on the streets, beating those streets. Spreading the love.
Yes, but thank you for having me. This has been great. I love connecting with Colgate alum And like I said, I like being back in the circle a little bit. I was away, but now I like being back in the circle. So,
and one of the things that
you.
we always encourage is that we all have our ties to some other AOC that maybe they were within our class, or just we've maintained some personal connection to, that may be off the radar, off the grid, or on the grid or on the radar. If there's any ones that are within your, sort of circle of trust that you think, well, hey, y'all definitely should be talking to this person. They got a great story. They're doing amazing things. By all means, do the mutual plug. Let them know about what we're doing. Let them listen to a few shows, hype them up. Tell them, listen, I gave them your name and contact information because they're going to be contacting you. Don't make us stalk you. But we definitely look for those referrals because we all know some folk who, may still haven't figured out that full circle experience yet. And this could actually be that opportunity for them to share and reconnect and bring them back into the fold.
Oh yeah, for sure. We actually have a lot of co-ed grads here in Buffalo. So I will reach out to them.
Okay. And truth be told, we all have various connections with different generations. And so you are in a generation and an era that we're looking to broaden and make sure we are representative of all alums, not just ones that are in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Sounds good.
All right. So on that note, I just want to thank you again. Really appreciated this opportunity and just wrap this show up. So thank you, listeners. This has been another episode of Aftergate, which is powered by the Defy Life Network. And make sure you go listen to us on the different platforms. Shout out to our interns, Kathy, Izzy, Sophia. Appreciate what y'all been doing this summer. That has been just an amazing asset to the show. And so just make sure you check out some of the many episodes to follow because we got many more amazing alums. Peace, family.
Oops. Thanks, kids.
Thank you. This has been awesome.
Shh. You hear that? Listen closer. That, my friend, is the deafening sound of focus. It drowns out all the useless noise that can clutter the moment. Naysayers don't exist. Haters? Smaters? The peanut gallery? Who's that? When you in your zone, all that noise and all that buzz is just elevator music. So, enjoy your journey, focus on your goal, and bask in the quiet roar that is progress. Because when it's your time to shoot that shot, spit that verse, or close that deal, the only voice that matters is yours. Defy Life.